Monster Professor.
Welcome to the Monster Professor, a show in which we discuss and explore monsters in literature, myth, film, games, folklore, culture, theater, and beyond. I'm your host, Josh Woods, author, editor, professor, and monster expert. And today's episode is with Matt Davids from DiceGeeks.com. You might have heard him on a previous episode, had a lot of fun. You might have even heard me several times on his podcast. He runs a podcast over there, DiceGeeks.com, tabletop role-playing podcast or tabletop RPG podcast. The link to that and his website will be in the description below. He's also an Amazon.com best-selling author of RPG supplements. The Book of Random Tables is a bestseller for him, among others, actually. And I had a lot of fun talking with him about what seems like random monsters, a couple of them anyway. You'll notice in this episode that there are some technical difficulties, perhaps a few more than I normally experience. So I'll apologize for that in advance, but I won't apologize too hard because, hey, you're getting this for free if you're listening to it, and you don't even have to listen to advertisements for creatine or car insurance or whatever it is people advertise. And so, you get it. You get a true vision of what we do here on the Monster Professor, warts and all, as they say. And actually, I kind of like it that way. So I had a lot of fun talking with Matt Davids, and I hope you enjoy it too. Here we go. Well, first off, Matt Davids, thank you so much for coming back on to the Monster Professor podcast.
No problem. It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me back on, Josh.
And I have to say, congratulations on the continued success of DiceGeeks.com tabletop RPG show podcast. I had the honor, and you had the dishonor of my being a guest on that podcast a few times. And I think I've only had you on mine once, but although it kind of all blends together for me every time we get together to talk about monsters, but I'm really excited to get to talk with you about some more monsters today. So let me back up and say congrats on your podcast, and let us know a little bit about how that's been going and what you have in store for it.
Yeah, the podcast has been going really well. As you know, I am always astounded by who you can reach by email these days, and who is willing to come on to a podcast by some random guy who lives in St. Louis, Missouri. But I have just been, just astounded with the quality of guests that I've been able to get on the show. I've had producers from Star Trek Deep Space Nine. I have had directors who have directed incredible feature films and TV shows, to some of the rock star game designers, if there is such a thing in the tabletop RPG industry. Of course there is. So I've had a number of those on there. I've also had a couple New York Times bestselling authors on there. And there are a lot of episodes that are dropping right now. So every week, every Wednesday, there is a new episode of the podcast dropping. So we talk about tabletop RPGs. I like to broaden the field a little bit. We talk about not only monsters, we talk about movies, books, science fiction, fantasy, all kinds of topics like that.
And the link to that show and to your website will be in the description of this episode for everyone listening on whatever platform you're listening to it on. You have that link below. Yeah, and so and as you and I, we kind of email every now and then, catching up, and our last series of emails, brainstorming an episode that we might do together again on the Monster Professor. Somehow, and I know not how, we ended up on let's talk shark movies, minotaurs, and dinosaurs. and and I don't have any idea if we're gonna connect them. I don't know if we necessarily need to. But I think some of it got started with finding out at some point that you're obsessed with shark movies, whether you knew it or not. And so maybe we could just jump around into sharks, minotaurs, and dinosaurs and sort out what we can. Is it true that you're obsessed with shark movies, Matt Davids? And if so, what's up with that?
I don't know if I would use the word obsessed. Um,
Okay,
maybe people
enamored.
around me might use that word, but
You have a crush on
I
them,
don't
maybe?
have a crush on them. I do have a crush on them, actually. I'll admit that. And I'm not 100% sure why, really. But I do. I am a sucker for a shark movie. And I don't know exactly uh, why that is. If it is just my love and appreciation of the movie Jaws, or um, or if it's something else, because obviously none of the other shark movies even compare really to Jaws, as far as quality and really even entertainment value. So I'm not sure why I'm obsessed with them, but maybe, well, I just admitted it, I guess. I am obsessed with them.
Yeah, and Jaws is not only kind of the gold standard of shark movies. Now, maybe I should back up and say I'm assuming that a lot of listeners right now are aware that it's hard to turn left or right on a streaming service or anywhere without finding some version of some shark movie. And it's not just Sharknado, although maybe we should talk about Sharknado a little bit. But they're
Yeah, I'm
just
sure we
shark
will.
movies all over the place. But Jaws is gold standard of a shark movie. But not just that, it kind of took over the minds of Hollywood producers for years and years. Like, if you're going to make this new movie, in what way is it like Jaws? It's like it's Jaws, but instead of a shark, it's the guy driving in the shark-like car through town. Or it's Jaws, but instead of Jaws, it's these graboids underground, and instead of the ocean, it's the desert. Right? Like
Yeah,
everything had to be
piranhas all over.
piranhas. Yeah, yeah. So what makes Jaws so great in your mind?
Well, I'm going to make a statement, and I know it's going to be some people will laugh at it. You may as well. I think Jaws is quite possibly the greatest movie ever made. um,
I'm not laughing.
it,
I think you might have some ground to stand on there.
um, if it's not number one, I think it's top five. And I think we can see that with like everything coming together with Jaws, like Steven Spielberg, possibly one of the greatest living directors, who was at really just talk about somebody who was obsessed with movies, right? That's all he kind of lived and breathed, right? Was movies. And also the screenplay, the cast, the score, kind of all of it came together. And I think this might be I you look at lists of the top 100 movies and things, and I think on IMDb, according to user ratings, Jaws comes in at number 50, if that's still correct. And so I'm glad to see it that high. But if you get kind of like the American Film Institute and other organizations like that, when they put out a list of the top 100 movies, Jaws, if it makes the list, it's 100 or 96 or something like that. And I just think that if the subject matter hadn't been a monster movie, and you take the technical proficiency of Jaws and how well that movie is constructed, if you took all of that and put it into a movie that had a different subject matter. Maybe, something like a young girl, graduates from college and she moves to New York and gets a job in an ad agency and then has an affair with her, 74-year-old boss or something. If you, that would be like reckoned by some of the Hollywood elite as like the greatest movie ever made. Like, just because Jaws is just so, it's a masterpiece of filmmaking. It's just a masterpiece of filmmaking, and I think it just gets kind of hurt a bit that people, it's like, oh well, it's a monster movie. Oh well, it's a giant shark movie or something like that. When it's actually a masterpiece, I think some other works suffer from that. I think Lord of the Rings, honestly, kind of suffers from that sometimes. Kind of when the literary kind of circles will kind of put it down because it has elves and dwarves and it doesn't contain any sex or something like that.
Yeah.
When it's actually like one, the greatest literary achievement of the 20th century.
Yeah, and I think we're slowly, evolving out of that, and I think I mean the word evolving, like those members of the species who used to think, who used to like trash something like Jaws or like Lord of the Rings because it contained monsters or fantastical items, like they're dying out, and the next generations, or well, people like me are becoming the professors, telling students in college how awesome these things are, and then they'll grow up and then they'll become the ones in charge. And so I think that's slowly changing, but it is slow. You're still right. You're right about that. That kind of, what is it? The bigotry of realism, something like that.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
and it's, it's all too easy to downplay something like Jaws, which is, and you could even call it simple, but I don't think you can call it simple-minded. I think maybe it's an elegant story in which you've got all the features of what makes, a perfect, nearly mythic kind of horror story together, all the way down to like, making it not just a random occurrence, but in brilliant and simple ways. It's the fault of the people of Amity that they're being eaten by this monstrous shark. And so I think it's an elegant little gem, um, in that way. And not to do the whole book is better than the movie kind of thing, because that's way too, that gets way too messy. But the book is absolutely surprisingly brilliant. And I liked the movie, but after getting into the book, I'm thinking, my God, I wish we had more of this depth in the movie, because it's not just that, they don't want to close the beaches, it's their greed that keeps the shark eating them. But it pulls back the curtain a little bit more, like Amity is this little place of decadence in which the rich come in and kind of feed off of the poor locals, and they're just doing their best to please these rich summer people. And even the old folks of the village of the island are saying, like, the shark is here to punish us for our sins, and they're quoting like, canst thou draw out Leviathan with a hook, and they start referring to him as Leviathan. And then you find out Amity, the island, is named Amity after the witch Amity Hopewell, who was like tried and executed there on the island in the 18th century. Like, my God, maybe this shark is something more than just a shark. It's so cool. And here I just went off talking more about Jaws than I let you talk about it. So maybe I should turn it back over to you, about Jaws, or the appeal of sharks. Do you have any insight for us, on maybe why else Jaws is awesome, and or why do we get obsessed with sharks? So, for not only in shark movies, but all the way down to like Shark Week stuff. Some people build their schedules around Shark Week. I don't know. What's up
Yeah.
with all this, man?
Yeah. Well, to continue with Jaws a bit, I think uh, just to talk about some of the filmmaking kind of aspects of it really quickly. If people, are kind of aware, right? We have a sequence where, our hero here, Chief Brody, needs to research sharks. So instead of, that could be a very boring sequence. Instead of that, Spielberg finds a visual way for us to see that by seeing a book reflected in Chief Brody's glasses as he's flipping pages. So we see these pictures of sharks flipping in the pages, and we also the kind of the famous beach scene when we get kind of the kind of the main the first really like big shark attack, and everybody's now confirmed that it is a shark. That beach sequence where Chief Brody is watching the water and people will walk back and forth in front of him, and Spielberg used the people as wipes to cut that sequence. And so he had different color bathing suits walking in front of them, and so he could use those as cuts. So if anybody's doubting kind of the technical proficiency of Jaws, I would ask them to kind of take a look back at that. But then also, you ask some, pretty big questions there about, why we are fascinated with sharks. And I don't know if I have some great answers here, because big questions like this probably have, quite a few answers to them. But I do think that it would have to start off with kind of the idea, if we're out on the ocean, if we're out in the middle of the water, we are surrounded by death, right?
Yeah.
If we fall into the water.
That's how I feel anyway.
Well, if we fall into the water or our boat becomes damaged, right? We're in the water. We're out of our element, right? We are in the water, and we are very, very much aware that if we can't keep swimming for a few hours or something, we're going to be in big trouble. But then, so you have that kind of fear. But then what you do, right, is you put a man-eating creature underneath that thing, underneath in the water, which we can't see into very far. So, I mean, you have a whole bunch of things working, on a number of levels, right? So we're out of our element. We'll drown in the water. There's a man-eating creature in the water. We can't see very far in the water. So it could be right next to us and we don't even know it. So I think that right there, those things right there really kind of add up to be why, Jaws and this giant shark make like a perfect horror movie.
Yeah, and then there's all those brilliant shots of that kind of unknown death swimming right under you, where you get to see things from the shark's perspective while you have that great score going on. And, that was another great surprise of the book, is how well written the scenes are where we get to just follow the shark from the shark's perspective and see the world from his perspective. It's really well written. And it's no surprise that I'm quickly rooting for the shark over everybody else. But I hear that there's a behind the scenes story about why Spielberg filmed it so much from the shark's perspective. Although I feel like maybe you would be the better man to explain that story and sort out whether or not it's real. Do you know what I'm referring to?
Yeah, that I think so, at least. That the animatronic shark didn't like to be in water.
Yeah, yeah, that's it.
It worked really well while they were testing it, and then they submerged the thing and it didn't work really well. So and there are, I think, in some of the making of documentaries that were on some of the anniversary edition DVDs, you can see some footage where the big animatronic shark is just like shaking and like just not working, and you can just tell, oh well, you can't use that shot or whatever. So and that did force Spielberg to rely on atmosphere and really play on the audience using their imagination to kind of fill in some of that and building tension with different things. The barrels, right? We get the barrels that are meant to pull the shark to the surface. Towards the end of the movie, as the shark has been shot with these ropes and these barrels, the barrels start kind of filling in for the shark, right? They'll pop up and the audience is just like, oh no, here's the shark, or be racing across the surface of the ocean, and the boat will be trying to chase it, and it's just used very effectively. And that technique, of course, then it kind of became a technique later on, because a lot of horror movies and monster movies then really tried to imitate that and really tried to build that tension without showing the monster. However, nowadays, I thought that that really set Jaws and it really made Jaws. However, nowadays, I know just from reading some things about some of these sci-fi channels movies that they take the opposite approach, right? You have to show the monster has to be seen. The monster has to be seen. I think it's like in the first 2 minutes, there has to be a death every 8 minutes. And then you have to see there's some other ones. They have a pretty good formula for it. And so you have to see the monster like all the time, even if your CGI is not the best. You just have to see it all the time.
Or you could just go the low budget route of something like Moose the movie and just have somebody in like a what am I thinking of, mascot suits that doesn't even bother trying to look like a moose, and so actually it looks like a Minotaur thing. Maybe that's an odd segue. But of course they're just making fun of the bad sci-fi monster movies. And
like the kaiju films with Godzilla.
Yeah, and and so, in the greatest film of all time, Jaws, I think you might have some ground to stand on. I think rather pluckishly, I was saying over email, Jaws is good, but it ain't no Tremors. Ken Davis. And I'm, because I think that movie is perfection, although, shot for shot, sound by sound, I'm not sure I could hold up an argument there. I think I would fight for a sentimental favorite of mine, John Carpenter's original Halloween, as doing everything brilliantly, but more by accident than I think Spielberg did. When I teach some film as literature in my literature classes, I typically show them at least the first act of The Godfather. That might be my pick for at least greatest American film, but maybe I should rethink. Maybe I should look into Jaws as being our literature as film kind of thing.
Yeah, I think The Godfather on the IMDb rankings is ranked number one.
Oh, is it? Well, good. Then
by
I'm not
users. That's by users. Yeah, and so I'm the guy's all right. I mean, it's certainly well made, but to me, I think entertainment is always a factor. And so, I watched The Godfather, and of course, I studied film in college, and you go through it and you can tell why it is very well made. Of course, the sequence, and now we're getting on The Godfather, but the whole sequence with kind of the child being baptized while people are being murdered, and brilliant, right? I mean, it's just brilliant, very by true definition cinematic, right? Because there is no dialogue hardly, that nobody's explaining what's happening. You're just all seeing it visually. But just something about Jaws where it's just so entertaining as well as being well made. And then, you do mention Tremors. Now you're talking to me, right? So I enjoy Tremors, quite a bit. But I just, and while, Ron Underwood is, a fine director, it's just, I think what you were saying about Halloween, I think Tremors kind of came together and it might have been an accident. that I just don't think that Underwood had the control of the medium, just like Spielberg, where Spielberg, it's just like, you can tell, just like every shot, he knew exactly what he was doing. And there were some, actually, just another geeky filmmaking point of view, because I'm an erstwhile filmmaker, but Spielberg, in a number of the scenes in Jaws where it's just all dialogue, it's very dialogue heavy, and we have to do some research because he's educating the public on what sharks are, because at that time, it was 10 years, 12 years before Shark Week. So we didn't have Shark Week programs and all this stuff, or no, 15 years before it. And so he shot those scenes, just another technical aspect. He shot those scenes using 3 different master shots and then edited them together instead of using kind of the standard master shot with insert shots. And I tried doing that in a couple of, some of the movies that I made. That is very difficult to do. It is so, I just, the level of expertise to pull something like that off is just, it just blows my mind. Because even in my feeble attempts while I was guerrilla filmmaking, and here, I think I can pull this off because there's no special effects. It's just master shots, and it is so hard to pull that off. And he pulls it off. He makes it look easy. And then Tremors, like we were saying, I enjoyable, very entertaining, but I just don't think he had the control of the medium, just like Spielberg did.
Yeah, I guess, I can't hang in there with an argument with you on that cinematically. So you win.
All right, I won something.
Well, how about this then, Matt and David, since you just took away, is a shark a dinosaur? I mean, aren't they like unchanged, biologically since the era of the dinosaurs, or damn close?
Yeah, that's interesting, because you do hear some people say that, right? They're a prehistoric monster or something, right? I know, and we do have all these other topics, but I mean, to talk about, but I mean, I could go on shark movies for a long time, but there's, for just to kind of wrap up maybe shark movies really quick, there are actually a couple different eras, right? There's an era that was inspired by Jaws, and we get a ton of Jaws ripoffs, and then it kind of dies down a little bit, but then a movie called Deep Blue Sea in 1999, that movie, that one kind of kicked off kind of a new era of shark movies, and arguably we are still in that. And actually, while I was doing some thinking and researching of shark movies, like I needed an excuse, but for the podcast, but I just noticed that in 2018 and then earlier this year, Deep Blue Sea 2 and 3 have dropped, and I didn't know that they were out there. So
no kidding.
You know what I'm going to be doing the next couple weeks, trying to watch those. And then maybe the shark movie has reached its climax with Sharknado and the Sharknado movies, where instead of playing it straight, right, they knew they were going to be bad within quotes, and they actually turned out some movies that are. It's hard to describe the Sharknado movies to somebody who hasn't seen them or doesn't like shark movies. But the Sharknado movies, if you watch those, you think that they're bad. There's something else going on here. While they're not cinematic masterpieces by any stretch of the imagination, there is a level of kind of I don't know what it would be, irony, self-awareness that they are playing on that is I don't know. It's something to behold. So everybody needs to go out and watch the 6 Sharknado movies.
Yeah, we we have to we have to pause here on Sharknado for a little bit because I think when I first encountered it, I'm like, oh, they've gone too far now. When I saw Sharknado, I'm like, no way, no way. But it's one of those things where you can't help but go ahead and click play and then watch what happens, and waiting for an excuse to like stop it and give up on the thing. And it stays so entertaining because it knows it's making a movie called Sharknado. And
Yeah.
the general concept, if I'm remembering correctly, is, well, actually it's more like a sharkicane. I think like this hurricane like thing,
Yeah.
like gets out into the ocean and then pulls up this unnaturally populated a group of, I guess, great white sharks, pulls them up into the air, and then delivers them onto this little coastal city. And
It's
so that,
L.A. It's
oh,
L.A.
is it LA? I was thinking it was Florida.
Yeah.
Okay, no, it's LA. All right, so
No,
it's a
that's the.
city that deserves to be attacked by nature and monsters.
Oh,
Uh,
they give L.A. some trouble too. Yeah.
and yeah, and then it just like, and so there are sharks like hiding in every flooded basement and everything all over town, while this whirlwind, and there's something about it that seems like almost a biblical spoof to me. Something about it seems like the wrath of God, or if not God, nature speaking out of the whirlwind, with millions of swords coming out of its mouth in the form of shark teeth, and coming down and like making these people have to flee like a lot for their lives. And maybe I'm connecting things so much that I've just committed some type of heresy or blasphemy by connecting Sharknado to biblical plagues. But I don't know, there's something of the Egyptian plague in it too, and yet they don't even bother to make it kind of viable. They tell it more like a goofy folk tale, like some of the oldest indigenous tales are. They're creepy, they're serious and disturbing, but they never take themselves seriously, and very often they're making fun of themselves. And so there's just a whole bunch of weird alchemy came together in Sharknado. And I don't know, I think I might have watched Sharknado the second or third, but I don't know. That's my Sharknado spiel.
Okay. You broke up a little bit, Josh.
Oh, okay. So, well, I was dwindling off there anyway, so maybe
Okay.
I'll stop on talking about Sharknado, other than
And then,
there is
yeah.
something magically strange about how it all comes together and kind of works.
Yeah. And you're right. Like they could have, the producers and the writers and the director, you could have done something where you tried to take it seriously, and you could have equated it with perhaps a biblical plague or something like that, but they didn't at all. Right. And they just knew that it's like, look, we're calling the movie Sharknado, let's just have fun with it. And poking fun at themselves while doing it, and while poking fun of movies and Hollywood, it just works. It just worked. And yeah, I don't know exactly what was in our culture that led us to this touchstone of being Sharknado, or rather than something else. But here we go. We are the society that deserves Sharknado, I think.
I like that. Yeah, I think it was Jacques Barzun who said, "In a decadent society, the only literature left is satire," and so maybe that's Sharknado is our sign of the times, that we have gone fully decadent.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I would totally agree. And yeah, yeah, it's just at one point it's just like, where does this come from? But it works, and they're entertaining, and they knew exactly what beats to hit at what times. And maybe we are the decadent society that deserves shark movie satire, or movies have just come down to a certain formula, and if you press those buttons, we just enjoy them. I don't know.
Yeah, okay. So now I have so we are kind of like these people on Amity Island. Like it's kind of not our fault, but maybe something about us deserves the shark coming to get us.
Yeah.
Oh, you know
Well,
what? Another thing I meant to bring up and get your thoughts on it, although it might be unwise of me to bring up. More than once, I've seen people posting memes equating coronavirus in the United States with the film Jaws. And so I thought at least I might bring that up, although that might be politically dangerous to talk about. um,
I think I missed that meme. I don't know what you're talking about. Sorry.
well, it's like where they show like the people saying no, we don't need to close down, and we don't need to wear masks, like we
Oh,
don't need to close down the
gotcha.
beaches, and then like they show a picture of Bruce the shark or Jaws coming up out of the water, and there's like a little thing over him calling him coronavirus, and then he
Yeah.
eats
Okay.
us,
Gotcha.
or there like something like Fauci's saying we're going to need a bigger boat or something like that, and there's a whole series of them, and I just thought, huh, shit,
Uh,
Jaws is helping people express how they feel about a current pandemic. So there's maybe something there
yeah.
about the applicability of such monster stories.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that is interesting because you do bring up, I guess, I don't know if I can coin a term, right? It's the Jaws problem, maybe. I don't know. Um, but uh, because, right, you kind of are stuck, right? Because you say close all the beaches down, but then what if there isn't a shark, or what if it isn't that big of a problem? Well, then you just shut all the beaches down, and you've ruined people's livelihoods for no reason. Well, then, so you want to keep the beaches open as long as possible, but then a little boy gets eaten right in front of your eyes, and you're like, I could have just closed the beaches, and that wouldn't have happened. Um, so you're kind of in this conundrum. When do you close? When do you reopen? Because somebody's either life or livelihood hangs on both of those decisions, right? And I am not qualified to make those decisions in coronavirus.
Yeah, I think we've kind of
But
established that no one is. But,
no one is.
yeah, so I don't know. I like it. We're in the Jaws problem. There's no easy solution to this.
There's no, because yeah, you're caught because then, right, you close well, and then like hindsight is 2020, right? So you close it all, and you close all the beaches so nothing happens, and you kill the shark. Then people say, well, why'd you close the beaches?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, and then
Because
there's no, yeah.
it wasn't that big of a problem. So you leave the beaches open, somebody gets killed or multiple people get killed. So then you close the beaches, you kill the shark, and then people say, well, why didn't you close the beaches? And so you're caught in both places, right? You're just caught in between those, saying, well, we were trying to protect people's livelihoods and their lives. And no matter what you do, when you come out the backside, right, people are going to say, well, you should have done it this way. And there is no, to me, the problem is very difficult to address. If the threat, right, you have to be able to do it, right, you would have to say, well, the threat is 100% known, right? If it was 100% known, then you could really make a solid case for it. But in a lot of cases, what the threat is a possibility. It's not
Yeah,
100%, right?
the movie makes that's a really good point. The movie makes a lot of that uncertainty of whether the monster's even still here or even still eating people, and I think the book
Yeah.
does that really well too, because so many other great pieces of monster literature just know that the monster's there. Like there's not a point in Bram Stoker's Dracula in which Van Helsing's like, I don't even know if Dracula is even still around. Like they know he's there, right?
Yeah.
I guess, I mean, Halloween does that thing too. John Carpenter's original Halloween, as Loomis is having a hard time convincing people that the shape is here to kill, or that he's here at all. And so that's another one like that. But that adds a really fascinating aspect to the story, and yeah, maybe that's why it's so applicable now.
Yeah, yeah, because yeah, it's just we there was, especially at the beginning, right? There was just so much we didn't even know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think we kind of sorted out America's coronavirus problem as best as as best as these two guys can.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
sorry, folks? There's no answer. You're in Jaws. Good luck.
Close the beaches, open the beaches. I have no idea.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's going to
Maybe
sound
we
like
should move on to Minotaurs before we get ourselves in trouble or something.
Yeah, well, it's going to sound like we're neutral or diplomatic, but I think we're just admitting our ignorance, and no one else will. So.
Yeah. And yeah, yeah, exactly. Because I certainly would not want to be any person with responsibility over it.
No, yeah, and maybe that's why part of the reason why I've avoided all forms of adult responsibility as best I can at this point in my life. That's why I'm talking about monsters right now in my living room. So on that
You
note,
got to be
yeah,
doing something though. You're a professor, right?
yeah, but it won't be long before people, catch on to this whole higher education thing is a bit of a scam and a gig, and all these professors are just kind of loony guys who like talking about what they've read, and that's pretty much college. So it's got 5 more years in it, maybe 7. I don't know.
Instead of learned scholar, you're just some guy who wants to talk about monsters in his living room. Is that it?
I think the latter is a more accurate description. I think both of them could fit, and I definitely try to sell the first one, but we all know the truth. I mean, so I mean, well, on that note, maybe let's jump to Minotaurs.
Probably.
Since I just tried to fire myself. Well, I have tenure. I don't know. And I don't remember how we got on Minotaurs either. Although I think what first comes to mind is I think Minotaurs are just one of the most, well, the Minotaur to me is at least one of the most fascinating monsters in our mythologies. Well, we've kind of imported it, modern has imported in from the ancient Greek, but everything about the Minotaur story, it seems packed with many levels of meaning. Like, this is a multivalent story of a monster that few other monsters have. And then a little bit more about the Minotaur in the RPG world than I do, but like the RPG world has really adopted the Minotaur, and so I don't really know what my question is, other than, Matt, give me your take on Minotaurs.
Okay. Well, yeah, I think we just kind of came up with it. I think I just asked you in an email if there was a classic monster you wanted to talk about, because we do talk about a lot of kind of perhaps recent or pop culture kind of monsters. And so the Minotaur, yeah, it goes as far back almost as we can go in history.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I think you kind of just alluded to it a little bit there. I think so. I think one of the big kind of distinctions that we need to first make is between the Minotaur versus a Minotaur or Minotaurs. And of course, in role-playing games, they have gone pretty much firmly towards the side of Minotaurs, that they are a race or a species that just populates a fantasy realm. And they are put into tribes sometimes, or they're put into different cities or, different societies. And they just become another fantasy creature, kind of along the lines of, goblins, orcs, and dragons, and what have you. But, I think it's important to kind of, when we go back, if we look at the original story, or kind of the, where the myth of the Minotaur comes from, right? There was just there was just the Minotaur. It was just one of them, and it was this specific creature. And I think you were right in saying that there are kind of layers of meaning, kind of all wrapped up in the myth of the Minotaur, and it's a fairly complex story to kind of unpack and to pull out. Keeping with ancient Greek myths, it's pretty much X-rated. It's it's bloody as well. Kind of all of those things kind of rolled into one, and kind of, but having it as like the Minotaur, I think that of course just adds a, just a weight to kind of that creature that some other ones don't have, right? That because we're fairly familiar with the trope of, in fantasy role-playing games, we're fairly familiar with the idea that there could just be dragons kind of all over the place, right? Maybe not all over the place, but at least there's going to be one on the tallest mountain, there's going to be one in a cave somewhere, there's going to be, maybe you have a couple adventures where you run into a dragon. But the concept of the Minotaur from the kind of the original myths makes that kind of a, I don't know what it just puts it in its own place. And Theseus has to deal with this unique monster at his place and time, and nobody else is going to ever have to fight a Minotaur.
Yeah, and in this original myth, he eats only the flesh of human beings. So he's not only just purely carnivorous, but he's like one of those animals that can only have one source of food, and his is human beings. And in the RPG world, are the race of Minotaurs, are they carnivorous? Are they, or do they eat humans?
It probably depends on what game you're playing, but not in some of the ones that I'm familiar with. They are carnivorous or omnivores or whatever. They just eat basically whatever humans eat. I am not familiar with one that a depiction that has to devour human flesh other than the original myth. And so, like I said, there's been a lot of changes, right? Like, so we get the kind of the idea for a Minotaur, and then it has evolved quite a bit, especially when it's come to kind of fantasy literature. I think also the depictions of the Minotaur has changed. Some classic, kind of the classical depictions either had had a body of a man with the head of a bull, or there were a few, I think, that had kind of the body of a bull with the torso and arms and head of a human, kind of like a centaur. But because
Ovid, as I remember in Metamorphoses, was just said, and that's probably the most famous account, because there was no real there was no real solid account of that story before him, and his was pretty brief, and I think all he said is part man, part bull. Although the archaeology shows that ancient Greeks envisioned it with man body, bull head. The medievalists, all the way through Dante, only had access to the Latin from Ovid, and so some of them, we're seeing him as a centaur, at least starting in the medieval era.
Yeah. And then a lot of the role-playing game material that I'm familiar with, of course, they take it a little bit different. Sometimes, like in Dungeons and Dragons, for a long time, they were just a chaotic evil monster that just would kill you if you walked in the room or whatever. But now some of them have evolved into, like what I was saying, into more playable races and things like that. But and then that depiction usually has kind of a humanoid bull almost in some regards, right? They'll cover them totally in fur, and they'll give them the kind of the hind legs of a bull kind of thing.
Do they like living in labyrinths in the role playing world?
you know, uh, I'm not 100% sure, but I've never come across one in Labyrinth or used one in Labyrinth in some of my own games. Maybe if you go back to some of the kind of the genesis of D&D, you might find something like that. But I'm not a D&D historian either, so um, so the labyrinth though is, I mean, talk about like you were saying, how many levels going on here. So you have a half man, half bull living in a maze, living in this labyrinth. I mean, you're just adding layer upon layer on this myth.
Yeah, and he's so like to even if we disregard like the fascinating features of his origin, as raunchy but as like curious and deep as his origin is, what you have, at least if nothing else in a snapshot, you have this flesh-eating half man, half beast in the middle of a maze in which these tributes get sent to him as food sacrifices. These young maidens and young heroes or whatever, these young fellas, every 7 or 9 years, Athens sends them these 7 or 9 tributes into the maze, and they have to wander until they're found and eaten by the Minotaur. And it doesn't take a whole lot of classical philosophy, or we don't have to be too well read. I think it's almost instinctual to see the maze or a labyrinth as something like the mind itself. And somewhere in our mind, we have this like half bestial thing that needs to be fed. And that might be even simplifying it, but that's pretty darn deep as well. I think all of that's packed up into this fascinating monster that just keeps hanging on.
Yeah, and I think there is something, kind of always about some of the Greek myths and this one as well, is that the hero of the story, right, has to face something that should be able to kill him pretty instantly, but he has to face those fears. And I always think that's I don't know, I just always think that is just a story or a tale to really kind of teach young people in a society, really, that hey, go out, face the monster, right? Face your fear. You afraid of that? Go face it. Kind of face it and defeat it. And so I kind of usually view it like that. I could be totally off base, but I usually kind of think of some of those things.
Yeah, and you've got to don't just be the victim as you're getting sent off to be eaten by this thing, but volunteer yourself for to confront this evil thing. I think a lot of our greatest myths have a little bit of that, like initiative and action into it, and like get up and go face that monster. But there's something about it, and maybe it's just me always rooting for the monster because I like the monster, but something about me makes me root for this poor guy. Like, it's not his fault he was born a Minotaur. He didn't do anything. And if I'm remembering correctly, like he was born with a name. He has a name. It's Asterion. His mom gave him a name, and Borges has this wonderful, just brilliant short story telling the whole tale from the Minotaur's point of view, the House of Asterion. So anybody listening who's curious and likes Borges, check that out. But also, when reading Ovid and thinking it through, if he gets these tributes, they had to keep him fed. And if he gets fed on this regular 7 and 9 year basis, and Theseus, it's always clear in the same tale, he always comes in at tribute round 3, then this Minotaur is only like 21 or 27 years old. He's a young fella. He's a young dude named Asterion. He just happens to have a bull head, and he eats human flesh. But bulls don't eat meat. And so if he's half bull, and half man, and he wants to eat other people, then that starts to make you wonder about human nature, I guess. Is his evil side the human side? I don't know. It's just, he's a fascinating character. But I'm also kind of curious why you think, the role playing world, adopted him to to populate him as a species, because they could have gone a million different directions. There are, well, at least hundreds of different possible monsters that they could turn into an almost regular race. And I think even some video games have the Minotaurs like the fourth race or fifth race you can pick. They
Mm-hmm.
could have picked any among dozens or hundreds. Why do you think? What do you think the appeal is of the Minotaur in modern role playing games?
Yeah, that is an interesting question. I think it probably, um, if I would have to guess, I think it would have probably just worked its way in because it is possibly a shorthand just to have like another kind of anthropomorphic, kind of race, and the bullhead and a few things kind of, separate that so they're not human. But then, yeah, why does it kind of capture the imagination a bit? And why do we kind of stick with it a little bit longer than some other races? Because as you know well, right, as you said, you could have picked, there were hundreds of different types of creatures like that from Greek mythology, Egyptian mythology, and kind of so forth. But I I kind of wonder if it is possibly connected to the some of the archaeological discoveries on the island of Crete by Sir Arthur Evans that we actually found in the location of where King Minos would be. We actually found a huge labyrinthine palace, uh, you know, that was obviously populated by a culture that were bull worshippers of some sort, with, is just full of bull imagery. And, of course, Sir Arthur Evans said, well, I found, Minos, and he dubs it Minoan civilization. Um, that there is something to it, right? It's like,
Yeah.
whether you believe there was a bull-headed, humanoid figure there in those archaeological ruins or not, you cannot deny that here is this ancient civilization. They worship bulls. They live in a palace that looks like a labyrinth, and you have to see all those connections, and you're just really able to kind of put them together, and say, well, that's a plausible place where the myth of the Minotaur certainly could have grown up from, especially say from a culture outside like Athens, looking at Crete, saying, here's all these people, they live in like this labyrinth, they worship bulls. It's just one extra step to say there's a Minotaur there.
Yeah, I like that. That's a really good observation. It seats the Minotaur into the real world in a way that makes all the lines fuzzy. If like in a
Yeah.
1,000 years archaeologists dig into what was once the islands of Japan and at a nuclear reactor site, they find the world's largest dinosaur skeleton. Maybe there was something to this Godzilla thing after all. It all's coming together. Like
Yeah.
the equivalent of that is what they did find, on
Yeah.
Crete.
Yeah. And I think another practical reason, especially as I've been doing my podcast and interviewing game designers and creators, pretty much all of the game designers and novelists that I interview are super into Greek mythology and Egyptian mythology and archaeology, and mythologies from all around the world. So when they come together to create a game, something like that is where you're creating a game where you can populate it with anything mythic. It is not shocking that the Minotaur just kind of jumps out and starts populating games.
That's cool. That's really cool to hear that, they're all using these deep and broad kind of myths to inform what they do. Because, definitely maybe I'm a little bit in on, the literature or the screenwriting side of the world, but I'm pretty darn clueless about the gaming side of the world. And so that's pretty cool to hear that they're all well read and knowledgeable about those myths, and that they draw from those. I think it's wise to do, probably no matter what your field is, actually. but that's
Yeah.
cool to hear that game designers do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that we shouldn't really be too surprised, but that people who write or design fantasy games are fans of fantasy literature. They're fans of mythology. It should be just kind of it should be common knowledge, I think. But even just diving in, like I said on the podcast, it's just become more and more aware to me that a lot of them will say, "Oh, when I was 12, I was just reading tons of Greek mythology because I loved it."
Interruption here. This is an interruption in post editing, so this is not part of the natural conversation. When we were talking, my connection started breaking up so badly that Matt couldn't hear me. He was kind to let me know, and so I cut that part out, and then we jump back in. So here we go. Okay. Okay. Well, I was wandering a little bit off topic, or at least off of monsters by the time I started breaking up, and I'm realizing not only have I kept you well past 40 minutes, I've kept you well past an hour here. So, and we never even got into dinosaurs. Maybe listeners will forgive us for now, and then maybe when I have you back on at some point, we can talk about dinosaurs. So how about shameless plug time, Matt Davids, for anybody who has enjoyed this conversation, listening to you, curious more about your podcast, your projects, what you end up doing. Where can they find you, and what should they check out?
Okay. Well, before, if I could just drop one little extra thing about a Minotaur. Uh, the Minotaur doesn't really have like a good kind of film representation, out there. They show up in a few movies here and there. Like, I think they're a plot device. A Minotaur is a plot device in one of the Percy Jackson movies, I think. But if somebody wants to go back and wants to look at a depiction of the Minotaur in the movie Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger from 1977. It is a Ray Harryhausen special effects movie. He created the Minotaur, which is a bronze statue of a Minotaur that is brought to life with like a magic clockwork heart of gold, and by the evil sorceress. And this Minotaur, this automaton of a Minotaur, goes running around and helping the evil sorceress. And so that is not to be missed.
I don't even think I knew about this. That sounds awesome. And there's something about the image of the Minotaur in bronze. I think maybe it's from the coins we've seen, but something about mixing him with an automaton makes perfect sense to me, although I can't really explain why.
No, I agree. It's just kind of a mashup, but it does absolutely make sense. It does absolutely make sense.
That's cool.
Yeah, so yeah, definitely check that out. Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger from 77. Yeah. Okay, well, yeah, I was prepared to like talk all about dinosaurs too, Josh, but and dinosaur movies, but it might end up being another 50 minutes of dinosaur stuff. So maybe so yeah, just if anybody wants to check out some of my stuff, you can head over to dicegeeks.com. And I write resource books for tabletop RPG, tabletop RPGs, just like Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder and other games like that, that help game masters cut down their prep time so they don't have to spend 3 hours preparing for a session before their friends come over. They can just go ahead and play. Or, well, I mean, we're in COVID, before they fire up Zoom or whatever.
And aren't you regularly #1 bestseller on such RPG supplement books on Amazon?
Yeah, a number of my books have been. I think one is, well, it was last night, again, in the Pathfinder category. the number one seller. So yeah, they, you know, I really focus on creating books that help game masters, and because I am a game master and I needed help, so I made these books, and so they help me. So I really want to help game masters have more fun at the table, so they don't get burned out. So yeah, you can find those at dicegeeks.com. You can find them at amazon.com. If you type in the Book of Random Tables, you can find them there on Amazon, and also Drive Through RPG is another marketplace where I sell those, where you can get the PDFs and some paperbacks. And well, actually, I just released my first hardback book ever that is on Drive Through RPG. It is called Dungeons. It is 51 dungeon maps with kind of a page of text talking about how, you know, ideas and hooks and different things that you can just flip open at the table and pull out and have a dungeon, just throw a dungeon right into your session right at the table if your players go off and want to explore the labyrinth, as it were. But you can find that at Drive Through RPG. It's just called Dungeons. And yeah, and then the podcast is wherever anybody is listening to podcasts. It's just called the dicegeeks.com tabletop RPG show. And like I said at the beginning, I talk to game designers, but I also talk to filmmakers, writers, directors, novelists, archaeologists who are fascinated in all of these things, fascinated with monsters, mythology, and how to use them in games, and how, you know, I always try to offer some game master advice so we can get better at running games.
That's awesome, man. And I think you've kind of started making yourself a bit of a hero, perhaps role model for the people out there who love role-playing games and think, man, how great would it be if I could just make a living off of this? But, you know, what if working as a full-time employee of like Wizards of the Coast isn't possible? Too bad someone can't make a living off of just being in the role-playing world. Well, go and check out what Matt Davids does and get his advice, because this man is doing it. So congratulations on that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's been it's just simply amazing that something I thought of when I was 9 years old, or something that you could actually, you know, make a living doing this, and it's just absolutely amazing. We have so much stuff at our fingertips now. We can, you know, so much technology and things that we can just reach our audience through different platforms, and it's simply amazing. I still wake up on certain mornings and just be like, I make role-playing game books for a living. Wow.
Living the dream, man. It's well, no doubt, tons of hard work as well, but it's really cool to see, and so I very much encourage everybody to go check out Matt David's stuff. Again, you'll have links to all this in the description below. And as always, I just have a real blast talking with you about monsters and games and movies and stuff. And so thanks again so much for coming on the Monster Professor podcast.
Oh, no problem, Josh. Thank you so much for having me back again. And I got to get you back on my podcast for the fourth time or something like that.
Absolutely. As soon as I get my tech problems sorted out, then and so I won't be dropping calls when I'm on your podcast, then we'll schedule something and make it happen again, because it's always a blast.
Yeah, that sounds good.